Hey guys, tonight we're traveling deep into the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, to a place where moonlight falls on rooftops made of clay, where sandals whisper over baked mud streets, and where, if you're not careful, your noisy habits just might earn you a ghostly houseguest, specifically a Babylonian spirit with a bone to pick about volume levels. You're standing beneath the looming silhouette of a ziggurat, its shadow stretching long and cool across a city that never quite sleeps, but certainly tries to. Babylon hums with distant lullabies, a warm cinnamon breeze drifting in from the date stalls still being shuttered for the night. Behind you, someone slams a door. It echoes sharply. You freeze. Because in this world, being too loud after dark isn't just impolite, it's dangerous. You could be inviting something in. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing how far this sleepy little caravan travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet crunch gently on gravel as you pass through the Ishtar Gate. The vibrant blue tiles still shimmer in your memory, even though you're several blocks away now, swallowed by narrower alleys and the flickering amber of oil lamps. Babylon at night is not quiet. Not entirely. There are merchants counting coins, the distant thrum of a reed flute. But there's a hush behind the noise, an expectation, a social rule thick as the dust in your sandals. Once the sun dips below the hanging gardens, loudness becomes taboo. Historians still argue whether this cultural quietude was rooted in religion, urban planning, or sheer fear. But the tablets don't lie. There were consequences for being too noisy after dusk. And not just from grumpy neighbors. Tonight, you're staying in a modest, clay-walled home in one of the outer quarters. Your host, an elderly potter named Mku, meets you at the threshold with a raised eyebrow and a finger to her lips. She says nothing until you're inside, door latched, sandals left at the door. "Speak soft," she says, eyes darting to the corners of the ceiling, "or we get the Edimu." That name again. You heard it earlier from a bread seller muttering under her breath when someone dropped a crate of pomegranates too loudly. Edimu. Supposedly, these were the spirits of the improperly buried, the forgotten, the outcast, the murdered paupers dumped without coins or prayers. Unlike the epic gods who dined on incense and ruled the heavens, the Edimu were petty, resentful, and close. Mainstream scholars classify Edimu among the Utuku, or spirit class entities, in Mesopotamian belief. But this particular legend, is different. He, or it, wasn't content to lurk in ruins or graveyards. It came when noise called it, specifically unearned noise, laughing too hard at night, singing without purpose, dropping a jug and not apologizing. Yes, it had manners, strangely enough. You duck beneath a woven mat doorway into your temporary room. No furniture, just a reed mat, a small jar of oil for the lamp, and a smooth river stone with curious grooves carved into its top. Mku tells you it's for pressing your fingers before sleep, a calming ritual meant to press away the echo. It works. Kind of. As you settle, your ears begin to attune to the soundscape of the city. There's always something. A baby's soft cry, a cart's wheels creaking, but nothing too abrupt, nothing too challenging. It's like the entire city is collectively holding its breath. And that's when you realize silence here isn't the absence of sound. It's a negotiation. In fact, Babylonian engineering factored noise into its urban design. Certain streets were paved with crushed pottery to mute footsteps. Courtyards were surrounded by thick clay walls to reduce bounce and echo. Even the famed hanging gardens, if they existed, would have muffled wind and wildlife with dense green walls and trickling irrigation. But of course, every system has its rebels. And tonight, as you're drifting off, you hear one. A door bangs open down the lane. Someone yells something slurred, maybe too much date wine, maybe just careless. You hear laughter. Then a pause. A very long pause. No one else laughs. The silence that follows is so sudden it has shape, texture. The city seems to tilt, like it's listening. Even Mku, 2 rooms away, stops her muttering. And for a full minute, Babylon becomes a frozen fresco. Oil lamps flicker, but no flames flutter. Wind holds its breath. And even the stray cat near your window makes itself small. Then, a creak. Soft, but not from wood. From inside someone's roof, like clay tiles settling where no weight should be. You feel it more than hear it. A shift in air pressure. A featherless wing of stillness moving through the lane. This, they say, is how it begins. According to fringe Mesopotamian lore, carved hurriedly into a side tablet of the Namtaru Codex, the Gedimu didn't float like ghosts. It slithered across sound itself. A parasitic presence riding the echoes of human life. One whisper too many, and it would crawl up your words and into your lungs, making you speak only in shushed tones forevermore, which, honestly, doesn't sound that bad. Except that people said once it entered, you couldn't stop hearing it, even when it wasn't there. Especially when it wasn't. You lie there, half asleep, wondering if any of this is true or just desert myth. But your lamp flickers once, just once, and in the far distance, the street drunk coughs and never makes another sound. You don't sleep much after that. Not because anything obvious happens, but because of what doesn't. There's no more laughter, no footsteps, no final clatter of dishes. The whole city seems caught in the web of its own caution. You lie still, the woven mat scratchy under your back, trying not to breathe too loud. By morning, nothing looks out of place. Sunlight glows honey gold across the mud brick walls, softening the drama of the night. But something's changed. Mku won't meet your eyes. She brews tea with shaky hands and mutters under her breath that the neighbor boy has gone hoarse from dreaming too loud. You sip quietly. The streets are still sleepy as you step outside, the scent of baked dates and river silt hanging low in the air. Babylon is stirring, but with a restraint that now makes sense. For a city famous for grandeur, it's remarkably quiet. You begin to see how silence here is woven into the fabric of life. Water carriers tip their jugs carefully. Vendors arrange dates in near silence. And children chase each other in strange, whispering games. Historians still argue whether these behaviors were a reaction to religious beliefs or simple social tradition. But one fringe theory, scratched faintly into a now-lost tablet once stored in the Temple of Marduk, suggests a more chilling cause, that a plague of noise-bound spirits swept through the eastern quarters during a particularly humid summer. The spirits, supposedly Adimu, responded not to violence or sin, but volume. Loud mourners, gossipers, even laughing brides were said to become targets. You pass a crumbling shrine, tucked between 2 homes. An old woman is gently washing the stone, whispering apologies with every motion of her cloth. The tablet beside it shows the faint outline of a spirit, all limbs and emptiness, drawn like a shadow stretching from a doorway. Its mouth is an open circle, or maybe an ear, no one's quite sure. You step closer and brush away a bit of dust, to reveal a line in Akkadian that roughly translates to, "He who sings past sunset opens his door to the uninvited." The quote reminds you of what Emku said the night before, that the Edimu come when tombs are disturbed or the dead are ignored. And yet, there's something more specific about this one, something focused. According to surviving myths, most Edimu drifted near cemeteries, shadows pulled toward forgotten graves. But this particular tale, one whispered more than written, spoke of a single Edimu whose origin was a public grave filled in haste after a battle. He had no name, no ceremony, and no family to wail for him. What he had, instead, was rage and supremely sensitive ears. The story goes that he first haunted grave workers who sang as they shoveled. Then the musicians hired to mourn professionally at the next funeral. Then the local tavern that served stew with too many arguments over bowls. By the time the priesthood acknowledged the pattern, 5 households had been muffled. Not murdered exactly, but hushed. Voices fading, music warped, laughter collapsing in on itself. The victims were said to be physically fine, just quiet, always listening, always wide-eyed, as though they feared their own echoes. Mainstream historians sometimes dismiss this as poetic metaphor for an ancient illness, perhaps a viral infection affecting the throat, or even mass psychogenic muteness triggered by trauma. But fringe scholars point to ritual records requesting specific silence offerings, not incense or coins, but whispered chants and, oddly, wool soaked in dew, left outside doorways before dawn. Supposedly, the wool absorbed wandering noise before it could settle. You make your way toward the river, where boats sway gently in the morning current. A fisherman mends his net and glances up as you pass. "You're the outsider, eh?" he says, then lowers his voice. "Did you hear it last night?" You nod. You don't explain further. You don't need to. He tells you that his cousin lives in the northern quarter, near a street that used to echo with evening laughter. But last month, a merchant's son threw a loud wedding feast. Flutes, drums, the whole deal. That very night, an eerie wind blew through the alleys. The next morning, the instruments were gone. Not stolen, vanished. The drum skins had been peeled clean. The flute reeds snapped silently in their cases. And worst of all, the groom stopped speaking altogether. The fisherman leans in and whispers, "Now, he only hums. One note, like he's stuck mid-song." You offer a polite smile, unsure whether he's exaggerating. But something in his eyes, fear mixed with familiarity, makes you believe him. Back near Emku's house, you notice the doors. Every single one has a thin strip of painted linen draped across it. At first, you thought it decorative. But now, you notice the symbols, spirals, closed eyes, and pairs of tiny ears. Protective glyphs, sound wards. Emku finally speaks as she packs clay into her pot molds. "The Edimu don't hate sound," she says, her voice no louder than your thoughts. "They hate being ignored." You blink. "Ignored?" She nods. "Noise that doesn't mean anything. Laughter for show. Gossip with no love. Loudness without purpose. It's not the decibel. It's the emptiness of it. This changes things. You start to see the spirit less as a vengeful ghost and more as a moral enforcer. A supernatural critic of performative sound. The ancient Babylonian version of that neighbor who bangs on the wall when you're watching reality TV too loud. But cosmic, and maybe a little justified. Later that evening, as the city dims again, you sit outside Emku's home, a soft oil lamp beside you. The streets are breathing in that slow, careful way. It's not silent, but every sound matters. Even the way the sandals scuff the ground, or the way a door closes slowly, with care, and that's when you hear it again. A flute, faint, wavering, somewhere nearby. You and Emku glance toward the sound at the same moment. Her face tightens. She sets down her pot, wipes her hands, and reaches for a bundle wrapped in linen. What looks like river wool, still damp. Someone's about to get a visit, she mutters, and you feel a chill settle over the clay doorstep. The flute stumbles again, high and clumsy, like someone learning, or worse, someone showing off. It doesn't blend with the city's rhythm. It cuts through it, a sound too sharp, too frivolous for twilight in Babylon. You and Emku exchange another glance. She doesn't run, but she moves with certainty, wrapping the damp wool around a fist-sized clay shard, whispering as she does. Her voice is nearly inaudible, barely breath. You follow, silent sandals padding behind her, as she slips between doorways and into a narrow lane you hadn't noticed before. This is no marketplace. This is one of the residential arteries of Babylon. Homes here are quiet by design, shaped like puzzle pieces, fitted tightly to muffle neighbors. The flute stops, just for a moment, long enough for you to feel the silence widen. Emku stops at a doorway painted with 3 spirals, sound wards again. "That's him," she says. "A scribe's apprentice. Bored, I imagine." Her tone drips with ancient disapproval. Noise without story is like smoke without fire. You want to knock on the door, to warn him, but Emku grabs your wrist with startling strength. "Don't invite yourself into his fate," she says softly. "He's already playing his invitation." And with that, she pulls you backward into the shadows, where the wall's cool clay presses your back. You wait. No ghost appears. No wailing or floating or spectral pyrotechnics. Instead, something stranger. The temperature drops. Not much, just a whisper of cool across your skin, like someone brushing past you, wearing damp linen. You can't even tell where it's coming from. The air feels both too dense and too empty. Then, from within the home, a thud. Not sharp, more like a body sinking or a chair slowly falling sideways. You don't breathe. Emku doesn't blink. A few moments pass. The flute doesn't play again. Later, as you walk home in silence, Emku explains. "That was probably the Edimu," she says matter-of-factly. "But not all of them hiss or scream. Some just adjust you. Make sure you listen better." It's unsettling, the way she says it. Not fearful, but familiar, like a person talking about seasonal rain. Not pleasant, but expected. Babylon, after all, is a city of spirits. They just tend to mind their own business, unless you disturb theirs. So who exactly was this spirit? The story, according to temple whispers and badly eroded tablets, starts in a city funeral ditch. After a small civil conflict, historians debate whether it was a failed rebellion or a land feud. Several unclaimed bodies were buried hastily at the edge of the Euphrates, near where the older part of the city once stood. One of those bodies belonged to a temple musician who had been exiled for playing sacred notes during a drinking feast. His name wasn't recorded, just his profession and his offense. Some fringe scholars believe this is the source of the noisy Edimu tale. A disrespected soul, silenced in death, returns not to seek revenge on the powerful, but to punish misused sound. In fact, buried fragments of the second tablet of murmurs, now in Istanbul, describe a spirit who drifts upon careless tones and strikes down the boastful mouth, which frankly sounds like the worst open mic night judge in history. One mainstream theory posits this was all metaphor. ancient Babylonians using spirit tales to enforce nighttime etiquette in cramped quarters, but others point to unusual burial patterns. In the years following the supposed haunting, grave markers near the river started including inscriptions like "He was sent off kindly" and "No grudges, no echoes." Epitaphs not for the living, but for whatever might overhear. And still others believe the story's persistence suggests there's more than mere social control at play. Remember that line etched near the shrine? He who sings past sunset opens his door to the uninvited. Versions of this aphorism appear in at least 6 city-states in the region, from Kish to Nipper, always phrased slightly differently, but always about sound after dark. Could a single spirit have left such an imprint across Mesopotamia? Or was this more of a cautionary archetype, a shared anxiety disguised as a ghost? You stroll through the city at mid-morning, letting the question hang. Babylon in daylight feels very different. Brighter, of course, but also louder. The rules loosen. The clatter of trade, the bark of goats, the shrill bargaining of fabric sellers all fill the streets like woven music. And yet, there's always that restraint, that pause before someone raises their voice, that side glance if a dish falls too hard. Even here, at peak sun, you sense the invisible line between permitted sound and provocative sound. Noise that serves a purpose? Fine. Noise that flaunts itself? Dangerous. You pass a group of children playing with sticks in the dust, drawing strange symbols, circles with ears, lines through mouths. They're chanting something too softly for you to catch. Mku tells you they're playing Catch the Whisper, a game where one child pretends to be the spirit and tries to sneak up on the others without making a sound. If caught, the player has to sit silently for a full round. A ghostly take on hide-and-seek, adorable, and just a little ominous. Even the youngest in Babylon know, volume invites attention. Attention invites the wrong kind of guest. Later, during a lull in the day's heat, you visit a public fountain where several locals fill their jars. One old man, Tuza, a retired reed cutter, leans over and says, "Back in my day, we feared the Adimu more than drought." You smile, unsure whether he's exaggerating. He grins back. Water comes back. A stolen voice? That's gone forever. You ask if he ever encountered the spirit. His eyes go distant. My cousin did. Worked in a tavern. Got drunk, played the lyre to impress some foreigner. He shrugs. Now he only hums. Off-key, too. The city, Tuza explains, developed rituals over time. Not to worship the Adimu, but to placate it. Offerings of quiet meals. Midnight oil left to burn without words. Even lullabies sung backward. He chuckles at that one. Mostly just scared children. But you never know what might work. As you return to Mku's home that evening, you notice something new. A small bowl of dates placed by the threshold, each pierced with a tiny stick of incense, unlit, unsmoked. Mku follows your gaze. For the air, she says, so it has something else to hold. You nod slowly, and once again, as twilight falls and the city dims, the sounds narrow into that sacred corridor of meaning. No casual shouts, no careless steps, just the soft hum of Babylon learning, once more, how to speak in whispers. You wake the next morning to birdsong, light and rhythmic, nothing too intrusive. Even the doves here seem to keep their warbles on a tight schedule. Mku is already up, sorting pots outside and humming a low, pleasant tune that barely rises above the breeze. After a modest breakfast of flatbread and honey, she tells you there's someone you should meet. A man who once claimed to be haunted. Not just once or twice, but for 3 straight nights after violating the city's unwritten curfew of clamour, as he puts it. You trail her through the shaded lanes, passing markets still half-shuttered, until you reach a modest home whose walls are painted with, wait, a rather elaborate mural. Not of gods or battles, but of clouds. Painted clouds, all puffy, all hovering silently above a man lying flat on the ground. A single golden ear floats in the sky above him. You've arrived at the home of Damu, a retired musician turned scribe. He greets you with a soft laugh and a loud yawn, which immediately earns him a glare from Emku. Sorry, he says, half smiling. I do it on purpose now. Testing fate. You sit with him in a small garden where he recounts his ordeal. Years ago, after returning from a particularly raucous feast, he decided to practice his reed flute under the stars. Midnight came and went. Damu didn't stop. Why would he? He was alone, under the heavens, channeling the gods. Or so he thought. The first night, he says, I heard nothing. But the air changed, grew heavy, like I was blowing into wool instead of wind. The second night, his walls began to crack, not in structure, but in sound. Whispers bled through the clay, muttering his own music back at him, bent and reversed. The third night, the flute snapped, not like a twig, more like it, unwound. The reed separated from its binding, as if it had grown tired of being forced to sing. Did I see a ghost? He shrugs. No, but did I feel judged? Absolutely. He hasn't played since. Not once. Historians still argue whether these tales are mere metaphors for guilt or psychological stress, perhaps even symptoms of ancient carbon monoxide poisoning from poorly ventilated lamps. But that doesn't explain the frequency of these stories or the specificity of their emotional core, regret paired with sound. And the patterns are consistent. You return with Emku just before the afternoon heat becomes unbearable, ducking into the shade of her courtyard. She pours cool water over your hands, a gesture of cleansing that feels more ritual than refreshment. Did you notice what Damu said? She asks. The flute didn't break. It gave up. It's true, and oddly haunting. That evening, you accompany Emku to what might be described as a neighborhood meeting, but not about taxes or zoning. This gathering, held in the courtyard of the local temple scribe, is about noise. More specifically, unusual sounds heard the previous week. A rhythmic thumping that had no source, a goat braying like a human voice, the sound of distant laughter when no one was awake. The scribe, a balding man with ink-stained fingers, records each report on a fresh clay tablet. He does not speak as he writes. When he finishes, he sprinkles the tablet with fine ash, muttering a line you recognize from Emku's stories. What is remembered is released. You're given a chance to speak. You hesitate, but describe the flute from 2 nights ago. Several neighbors nod, confirming they heard it too. One woman says she lit her incense early because of it. Another claims her baby didn't cry at all that night, as if he, too, had been listening for something larger than himself. There is no hysteria, no panic, only quiet acknowledgement, as if they all know they're sharing space with something old, and perhaps not entirely malicious, just precise. Later, Emku explains the belief in what some call the quiet curse, though not everyone uses that term. It's less a curse and more a conditioning. A behavior corrector, she says. The spirit doesn't strike down criminals or blasphemers, only those who disrupt the balance of the evening, those who treat sound like a toy rather than a thread in the city's great tapestry. Back at her home, you watch her prepare for bed. She smooths her mat with lavender water, ties a red thread around her wrist, and, most peculiarly, places a dried beetle shell on the windowsill. Crunches sound sharp, she explains. They distract it. You're starting to wonder if half of Babylon's customs were designed not for gods or kings, but for this one picky ghost. That night, your dreams are vivid. You're walking through a field of reeds. Every step makes a noise, a specific note. One step is a whisper. One is a sigh. One, a full-lunged laugh. And the wind carries all these sounds upward toward a floating, golden ear that hovers just above the horizon. You wake unsure of whether the dream was warning or lullaby. The next morning, you find a small gift outside your door. A tiny clay ear, its center pierced with a spiral. A common symbol, Mku tells you, of a listening ward. It means someone is watching out for you, or warning you to pay attention. You keep it in your pocket. You carry the little clay ear in your pocket all day. Not out of superstition, well, maybe just a touch, but because it feels like an invitation to listen more closely. And in Babylon, listening isn't just polite, it's protection. Today, Mku sends you on an errand to the temple district. Not the big, flashy ziggurat, towering like a divine layer cake, but the smaller priestly quarters nearby. The alleys here are winding, deliberately quiet. Walls curve in strange, sound-softening angles. You pass no fountains, no music stalls, no shouting vendors. Even the pigeons seem to coo more modestly here. At the Temple of Nabu, god of wisdom and writing, you're greeted by two sleepy-looking acolytes who barely blink when you ask about the spirit who hates noise. One offers you a clay seat. The other simply says, "Oh, the Edimu again." Turns out, this isn't the first time someone's wandered in with questions. They get 2 or 3 a season, usually after an especially noisy festival, or a drunken cousin wakes up, unable to speak above a whisper. The priests don't confirm anything directly, but they do share stories, half myth, half memory, about what they call Nesh Orhibu, or the disturbance of breath. It's said to be the sign that an Edimu has taken interest, an invisible pressure on the chest, a thinning of the voice, the inability to shout even in dreams. One priest, Nisanu, a man with surprisingly pink cheeks for someone so serious, tells you about a case where the entire staff of a bathhouse went silent overnight. All they did, he says, was bang on pots after hours to scare away rats. Did it work? You ask. Not on the rats, he replies, utterly deadpan. There's a clay tablet in the temple archive room that particularly catches your eye. It's cracked and blurry with age, but it bears a diagram of a house. Around it, tiny glyphs for ear, mouth, gate, and wind form a spiral. At the center, the word shatu, meaning harmony, or tuning. Nisanu points to it and says, "Every home is like a lyre. If you pluck it wrong, someone, or something, might tune it for you." You thank him for the time and the cryptic advice, and make your way back through the dusty sunlight. On the way, you pass a group of children playing what appears to be a strange version of tag. One wears a reed basket on his head, the listener, while the others try to sneak up on him in silence. If they make a noise, he points and yells, "Heard!" and they're out. You pause to watch. The game is eerily accurate. Someone taught them this version of tag with serious attention to Edimu lore. Historians still debate whether such children's games preserved fragments of real rituals or were invented after the fact by clever adults trying to keep kids quiet. One fringe theory even claims that certain lullabies, like the repetitive hums used in northern Babylonian villages, mimicked the rhythm of temple exorcisms, giving children subconscious tools to avoid spiritual notice. Back home, Mku is sketching on wet clay. She's designing what looks like a pot, but the neck is elongated, fluted in a spiral. "Sound trap," she says simply, running her thumb along the groove. If the Edimu drifts in on a careless word, this confuses it. You ask how she knows it works. Her answer is unnervingly nonchalant. "We haven't had a silencing here in years." You sit beside her and help shape another pot, more clumsy than elegant. She tells you more local stories, like the baker who only ever spoke in recipes after disturbing a funeral chant, or the washerwoman whose echo kept coming back different. Always delayed. Always whispering. These stories aren't in textbooks, not even the obscure ones. They live in calloused hands and temple margins, in homes built with curves to confuse footsteps, in walls thicker than necessary, and in the way every Babylonian instinctively lowers their voice at twilight. And then Emku says something that sticks with you. The Edimu doesn't hate life. It just misses being part of it. You blink. That's not how you'd thought of it before. "Imagine," she continues, "you die without a name. No songs, no crying, no offerings. No one listens when you go. And now everyone's talking, loudly, thoughtlessly, and you can't join. You're just wind. Wouldn't you be angry?" You would. Probably. Later that evening, Emku takes you to the rooftop. Babylon's skyline is a warm tapestry of flickering lamps, swaying palm fronds, and slow-moving stars. Below, the sounds of the city soften. Cups clink gently. Someone drags a stool. A dog huffs once, and then quiets, and then you hear something unexpected. Laughter. Not wild, but real. Two neighbors chatting across rooftops, low and honest. Emku smiles. "See, you can make noise. You just have to mean it." It's a distinction modern historians rarely make. Most academic treatments of the Edimu focus on fear, silence, exorcisms. But here, with dust between your toes and the city humming like a lullaby beneath you, you understand something deeper. The haunting isn't about volume, it's about carelessness. And maybe, just maybe, that's the heart of this ancient tale. Not punishment, but a plea. To speak with purpose, to remember the forgotten, to fill the night with sound that soothes, not shouts. Down the street, a child calls for her mother. The voice echoes once, sweet and clear, and fades like a stone into water. Nothing stirs. The spirit, if it's out there, is listening too. The morning begins not with birdsong this time, but with the crisp rustle of palm leaves outside your window. A subtle breeze carries the smell of date syrup and dust, and the city slowly slides back into life. Babylon wakes with ceremony. No sudden bangs, no horns, just the quiet labor of daily routine. Today, Emku hands you something unusual, a wrapped tablet. "You'll like this one," she says. It's a confession. You raise an eyebrow. She gestures toward the eastern quarter. Temple archivist found it last week. An old tablet stuffed behind newer ones. Might have been hidden. Might have just been forgotten. The scribe who wrote it claims to have met the Edimu himself. This is the sort of thing historians live for, and others try to ignore because it throws too many wrenches into clean narratives. The tablet, about the length of your forearm, is surprisingly smooth. Its inscription, though weathered, is remarkably intact. You settle into Emku's courtyard to read, the shade just beginning to chase away the morning heat. The story is told in first person, unusual for a temple record. It begins, "I, Nedu of the house of the Inkreed, scribe of minor matters, record this not to glorify myself, but to rid my mouth of echoes." That's how you know it's going to be good. Nedu explains that he lived alone, unmarried, but took great pride in his voice. I was known, he writes, for making temple announcements with extra flair. Apparently, his habit of over-dramatizing ceremonial readings drew attention, not all of it positive. His colleagues scolded him gently at first, then more seriously. He ignored them. Then, one evening, after reciting a temple calendar with what he proudly described as thunderous flair, his home began to feel thin. Not haunted, not cursed, thin. He writes of a change in acoustics, the way his voice seemed to fall flat or bounce oddly in his little room. At first he blamed humidity or mice, but then words stopped forming correctly. My tongue betrayed me, he wrote. What I meant as sacrifice came out as sleep rice, classic haunting symptom, or just a scribe losing his edge. You'd guess the latter, until the dreams start. Nedu claims he began dreaming of doorways, endless rows of them, some open, some sealed, and beyond each one, a voice, always speaking, never to him, always just missing the moment of comprehension, a word behind, a whisper too far. One night, he turned in the dream to face a particularly large doorway and heard a voice say, "Listen softer." He awoke with the tip of his reed stylus snapped clean in half, though he swears he hadn't touched it. From there, the events escalate. He writes of moments where the air in his room would pause, not go still, pause, like a breath being held by someone with no lungs. Objects moved, not violently, but suggestively. His ceremonial sandals disappeared for a week, returned folded. His water jug leaked, but only when he tried to drink loudly. Finally, the Edemu appeared. I didn't see it, he admits, but I knew it was there. I felt the echo of myself arriving too soon. I spoke, and my words answered me before I finished them. That is how you know. That line sends a chill down your spine. Nedu, in desperation, began whispering even to himself. He stopped reading aloud at work. He wrote only in cursive. Eventually, he sought help, not from a priest, but from a potter named Kurzu, known for crafting ritual objects for unrecorded gods. This potter gave him an unusual object, a hollow clay tube with fluted ends, painted in spirals and ears. Not a horn, not a flute, something in between. Kurzu called it the voice ladder. He told Nedu to blow through it, not forcefully, not musically, but gently. Nedu did, night after night. The dreams stopped. The echoes faded. The air stopped feeling like a held breath, and on the final day, Nedu writes, I sang again. Just a hum, the kind a mother gives to a sleeping child. The spirit did not answer. I believe I passed the test. The tablet ends there. You sit quietly, rereading the final lines. Emku brings you a bowl of lentils and asks if it was worth the effort. You nod slowly. What strikes you? She asks. You think for a moment, then reply. It wasn't fear that saved him. It was humility. She grins. Exactly. The Edemu doesn't crave obedience. It just wants us to listen. And maybe remember not to show off with temple calendars. You laugh softly. Historians still debate whether Nedu's story was a morality tale disguised as autobiography or a genuine record of spiritual intrusion. Some argue that the voice ladder is actually an early prototype of a musical instrument or sound diffuser, not a ritual tool. But among fringe scholars and Babylonian potters, it holds another name, the Whisperer's Pipe. A few broken pieces of similar design have been found in lower Mesopotamian ruins, usually near homes with strange inscriptions. One bore the phrase, "Let the house hear itself," which sounds poetic, or ominous, or both. Later that evening, you wander the city again. The sun is low, shadows long. You pass a vendor, selling what looks like tiny clay tubes with etched spirals. "Voice ladders," he says, seeing your curiosity. "For children. Helps them sleep." You smile and buy one. Not because you believe it works, necessarily, but because it's small, smooth, and feels good in the hand. And if the Adimu is out there, drifting on careless chatter, maybe it'll hear your little hum through the hollow and decide you've passed the test, too. You return home as the sky fades to velvet, your breath slowed, your footsteps quiet. Babylon hums softly around you, like it always has. But now you notice every whisper, every sigh, every echo. You're part of the song now. You wake in the middle of the night, not with a start, but as if invited. The moonlight spills over the city in waves of silver, painting Babylon in liquid silence. You sit up slowly, the clay ear still tucked in your pocket, the little voice ladder from the market resting beside your mat. Everything is still, and then you hear it. Not a scream, not a moan. A voice, but not speaking. Humming. The same soft hum you read about in Nedu's tablet. A lullaby from no mouth. A sound hanging in the air like the last breath of a song. You don't panic, you listen. And as you do, the walls of Mku's home seem to shift, not physically, but in tone. The clay muffles, softens, like it's absorbing the noise. You realize with a faint smile, this house has been built not just against heat, but against echoes. The hum fades, you lie back down and drift off again, as though lulled by the very presence that once terrified this city. The next morning, Mku is waiting with tea. "You heard it," she says, not a question. You nod. She tells you the Adimu has many forms, some whisper, some bend sound, some simply observe. And then there's the rarest kind, the listener, the one that doesn't punish, but evaluates. You may have been tested, which brings her to today's plan. A visit to a ruin on the city's edge. A place few remember. A house where sound once lived too loudly. You walk together through quieter quarters until the streets thin out into overgrown paths. Just before the river bends, there's a half-sunken structure, its walls leaning like tired elders. Vines curl up its flanks. You recognize no symbols. Mku nods toward the threshold. This is where the loudest man in Babylon once lived. That's not a metaphor. He was a market caller, paid to shout deals so loudly people 2 streets away could hear them. He was proud of his voice, boasted that the gods themselves might hear his prices and come bargain. One evening, he even held a competition to see who could yell louder. That night, half the neighborhood claimed to hear footsteps on the roofs. No one saw anything. But by morning, the caller's house was different. No one inside was injured, nothing was missing. But every surface had been scrawled with the same symbol, the spiral. The man himself? Speechless. Not mute, just empty. He gestured, he smiled, he tried to speak, but nothing came out. His voice had been unthreaded. He left Babylon soon after. Archaeologists uncovered this ruin decades ago, but found no artifacts, just walls etched with hundreds of spirals, many overlapping, as though something had rewritten itself again and again. No 2 are identical. Some claim it was an early form of art therapy. Others think it was his attempt to speak through carving. Fringe theorists believe he wasn't alone in the house that night, and that the Adimu left part of itself behind. You step inside. The silence here is dense, not peaceful, not comforting. Like sound is discouraged from forming. Your breath seems to hesitate. The whisper of your sandals feels offensive. In the far corner, you spot a shelf with broken pots, sound traps, like Mku's designs. Some are twisted, malformed, as if the clay itself refused to take shape. One has cracked in a spiral pattern. You pick it up carefully. Mku shakes her head. "Let it be," she says. "Some stories shouldn't be retold too soon." You nod and step back. On the way home, she tells you about another custom, hanging small bells filled with wax by your door. Not to ring, but to not ring. A way to mark the presence of silence, to capture it like fire in a lamp. You see a few now, dangling under eaves. They shimmer, delicate and still, the wax inside unmelted. Historians scoff at this, of course. They say the bells were ornamental, the wax for preserving scent. But every now and then, one falls, and when it does, it's always during a storm or an argument. Back in the courtyard, Mku prepares dinner. Tonight, the air is different, less tense. The city seems to be exhaling. You watch a child across the alley tell a joke, quietly, but with gusto. The adults laugh, not loud, but real, and you realize something. The Adimu is not the villain of this story. It's a curator, an ancient sound engineer. Babylon's original volume knob. Maybe it isn't even angry. Maybe it just wants us to mean what we say. Later you lie down to sleep. You don't hum. You don't speak. But you leave the voice ladder near the window and the clay ear beside your mat. If it returns tonight, you'll be ready, not to fight, but to listen. You wake slowly, as if surfacing from beneath calm water. No startling noises, no jarring dreams, just the warm smell of clay and morning porridge, the distant clip-clop of donkey hooves against the stones, and the delicate rhythmic tap-tap-tap of Mku engraving something in the courtyard. She's inscribing the rim of a small oil lamp, a spiral, of course, etched so fine it nearly disappears into the curve of the clay. "Protection?" you ask, still groggy. "Memory," she replies, "for the spirit, so it knows it's not forgotten." It's a curious idea, offering memory to a spirit as a gift, rather than incense or song. But it tracks. Everything in Babylon, you've come to realize, is a negotiation between the seen and the whispered. Today, Mku proposes you visit an old friend of hers, a librarian. Not just any librarian, mind you. This one runs what could generously be described as a whisper archive. You're intrigued, so off you go, weaving through alleyways, past a surprisingly well-organized fish market, until you arrive at a sunken building that smells of old reed baskets and lamp oil. There, in a room the size of a modern pantry, lives Sirutu, thin as a stylus, blind in one eye, and draped in more linen than strictly necessary. He doesn't speak at first. Instead, he holds up a finger and turns his head, listening. After a long pause, he says, "You've been near the haunted ruin." You're too startled to respond. Sirutu smirks. The clay remembers. He explains, in his thin, rasping voice, that some materials absorb sound, not like modern microphones, but in their own ancient way. Clay, for example, was once believed to carry the echo of voices long after they were gone, which is why many funerary tablets were made of it, to hold the last sound thoughts of the dead. Historians still debate whether this was poetic metaphor or an actual belief in auditory imprinting. Some fringe researchers claim the Babylonians were unknowingly experimenting with primitive acoustic recording by etching rhythmic lines into soft clay and drying them to lock in vibrations. There's even a preserved theory, never formally published, that certain temple jars were tuned to resonate when whispered into at specific frequencies. Sirutu leads you to a stack of faded records, stone, not clay. These, he explains, are sleep logs, records of dreams, transcribed by priests in training. Among them, one particular entry catches your attention. I was in my own house, but it spoke like a stranger. The wind repeated my thoughts before I had them. I asked a question and received my answer in the walls before I finished. It matches Nedu's experience, the same overlapping perception, the same sense of being heard before you speak. And here's the kicker. The dream is dated 200 years earlier. So is it the same Edimu? Sirutu believes so. He refers to it not as a spirit, but the spirit. Not singular, necessarily, but constant. An archetype that walks through generations, adjusting to new listeners. Every city has its noise keeper, he says. Ours just learned how to be subtle. You ask why it haunts at all. Why not just disappear? Sirutu shrugs, wrapping his shawl tighter. What is a spirit without purpose? Maybe it once wanted vengeance. Now? Maybe it just wants rhythm. Before you leave, he gives you something odd. A sheet of polished obsidian, thin as a fingernail, engraved with tiny spiral waves. Hold it to your ear next time it hums, he says. You'll hear its age. Back outside, the city feels different. Not louder, but more layered. Every sound, from the creak of wagon wheels to the murmur of market bartering, feels intentional. Like each belongs in a larger score, a slow symphony only Babylon knows how to play. You head home by a different path, where you pass a mural partially hidden by vines. Peeling back a curtain of ivy, you see a strange image, a giant ear floating above a crowd of people. All of them looking up, not with fear, but with awe. Emku meets you at the door. Did he show you the glass? She asks. You nod. Then you're ready, she says. There's one more place. She doesn't elaborate. That night, after a quiet meal and a small fire, you hold the obsidian plate to your ear. Nothing at first. Then a faint resonance. Not quite a sound, more like remembering a tune you've never heard. It comes in pulses. Not words. Not a melody. But rhythm. You sleep deeply, and you dream. Not of doorways or spirals, but of your own voice, disassembled, laid out in parts. You see your laughter, your questions, your curses, your quiet thank yous, all hung in the air like bells, and something, somewhere, listens. You rise with the sun, your ears still tingling from the dream, not painful, just aware. Like they've been stretched gently in all directions, tuned like instruments. The obsidian shard lies beside your mat, still cool, still pulsing with some echo you can't quite place. Emku is already dressed when you enter the courtyard, brushing ash from her robe and securing a cloth bundle at her hip. She looks at you with a glint that means you're not staying home today. We're going to the outskirts, she says, where Babylon used to be, before Babylon became Babylon. The idea that Babylon had a before Babylon isn't new to you, but it hits differently when you're actually walking there, through crumbling outer gates, past neglected fields where date palms now grow wild and silent. The air out here smells of dry leaves and flint. Fewer people, fewer carts, just wind, dust, and the creak of time. After a few miles, you come to a strange little hill. More of a hump, really, barely noticeable from the road. Atop it sits what remains of a shrine. 3 stones, low and wide, arranged in a crescent. No statue, no altar, no signs of recent offerings. Here, Emku says, brushing away the soil at the base of one of the stones. She reveals what looks like a narrow grate. A hole, perhaps a finger width wide, fitted with thin clay ribs like panpipes. A whisper well, she explains. The first ones were made to let spirits speak out. Later, They became ways to listen for them instead. You kneel beside it. The breeze filters through the grate and produces a low, soft hum, not unlike a sleeping breath. You place the obsidian shard to your ear again and hold it over the opening. The tone shifts. No words come through. But the rhythm you heard last night, the dream beat, matches this vibration exactly. You are hearing the same presence, here and now. You ask Emku who built this. Probably the first priests who recognized the spirit, she replies. Back when it didn't punish, but guided. This was before the temple hierarchy, before written codes, back when myth and memory blurred like shadows at twilight. One prevailing theory among scholars is that Edimu tales began as metaphors for social harmony, an invisible force that discouraged chaos. But out here, where stones are all that remain, the story feels older, deeper. Emku begins pouring oil into a shallow depression near the stones. You watch as the dark liquid pools, then ripples. Though there's no wind, she speaks softly. Spirit of the breathless, listener among the proud, keeper of volume and echo, we remember you. Not to silence you, but to hear you rightly. And the wind answers, not in words, not in movement, but in resonance. A deep, low chord that seems to rise from the ground itself. For a brief moment, everything, including your heartbeat, syncs with the sound. Then it fades. You sit in silence for a while, watching the oil still itself. The sky above is cloudless. Even the insects have gone quiet. Emku finally breaks the silence. People think ghosts come back because they're angry. But maybe this one never left. Maybe it's part of the city itself. You wonder aloud, what happens if Babylon ever goes truly silent? Emku chuckles. It won't. Cities dream in noise, but the spirit makes sure we remember when not to shout. That afternoon, as you walk back toward the city, you pass other forgotten places, half-fallen walls with faded murals, broken sound traps scattered like old bones, wind chimes stilled by dust. You begin to recognize signs, not alphabetic, but architectural. Rooms curved to guide voices, floors designed to muffle steps, ancient acoustics at work, and you realize Babylon was never just built for worship or commerce. It was built to hold sound carefully, even in its bones. You reach the main gates just as evening begins to fall. The city is returning to its nighttime shape, lamps glowing, footsteps lightening, voices softening. The difference is subtle, but you feel it in your bones. You are no longer just an observer of Babylon's hush. You are part of its ongoing, quiet ritual. That night, back at Emku's, you pour a few drops of oil into the corner of the courtyard. Just a flicker. Just enough. The obsidian shard rests beside it, and for the first time you hum. Not a song, but a pulse, a rhythm. Your own. And the night listens. The next morning feels different. Not colder, not brighter, just quieter. As if the city itself is holding its breath a little longer before beginning the day. You sit with Emku over breakfast, dates, bread, and a thick, slightly gritty sesame paste, and ask her about something that's been gnawing at you. Was the Edimu always tied to sound? Or did that come later, after Babylon became loud? She doesn't answer at first, just pours tea. Then she leans forward and says, I'll tell you what my teacher told me. The gods hear you through your echoes. The dead hear you through your silences. But the Edimu hears everything in between, which is helpful and completely maddening. So, today's adventure takes you to what remains of the old Southern Library, really just a courtyard piled with shattered tablet fragments. It hasn't been maintained in years. But a few locals still dig through it, looking for useful clay scraps or forgotten stories. Among them is Baran, part scavenger, part amateur historian, full-time expert in things no one else bothers to study. When you explain what you're looking for, Baran nods like he already knew you'd come. "I've got just the thing," he says, pulling out a tablet broken in half, the kunai form faded and smoothed, but still legible with enough squinting. Old priest's journal, early 2nd Dynasty, mentions the spirit before it was called Edimu. Your pulse quickens. The tablet refers to a breath that watches, a spirit that didn't punish or haunt, but simply lingered near the unspoken. It appears in quiet places, thresholds where farewells were never said, unfinished lullabies, empty cradles, corners of homes where people whispered things they wished they hadn't. One passage reads, "In the season of soft winds, we heard the walls breathe, not with anger, but with need." A hush asked for remembering. We spoke its name with no voice, and it answered by leaving the lamp unshattered. Historians still argue whether this was an early description of the Edimu or a separate tradition entirely. Some claim this breath was a predecessor, a gentler version later corrupted by fear. Others think it's the same entity, adapting over time to Babylon's changing tempo. Baran, ever the enthusiast, has his own theory. Maybe it's not a ghost at all. Maybe it's Babylon's first citizen. Still here, still listening. He smiles as he rolls up a half-eaten fig in a palm leaf. Or maybe it's just bad ventilation in clay homes. You like him. Before you leave, Baran shows you one more thing. A sealed jar filled with air. No, seriously, just air. The jar has a clay stopper with a tiny reed shaft stuck through the top. It's labeled Zi Shagu, which roughly translates to spirit breath. According to Baran, it was used in mourning rituals. Mourners would whisper into the reed after funerals, trapping their unsaid goodbyes inside. The jar was then buried, or, more rarely, kept above the doorway, to remind the dead where they could still be heard. You ask Emku why that tradition ended. "Because it worked," she says. You return to her courtyard late in the day. The shadows stretch long, and the air is tinged with that amber kind of silence that happens just before night. You sit under the tamarisk tree and think. All this time, you've been trying to understand the Edimu like a person. But what if it isn't a who, but a when? Not a being, but a moment. A presence that slips into the space between words, between intentions, between memory and sound. You take out your voice ladder and hold it gently. Blow across it once, softly. Not to summon, just to mark that you're here. A single note rises, clear, low, steady. It lingers a bit longer than it should, and then very faintly, from somewhere inside the clay walls, you hear a second note, matching yours. Not louder, not closer, but known. Emku doesn't comment. She doesn't need to. Later that night, as you lie on your mat, you find your thoughts turning to the earliest humans, those who grunted and whispered in caves, who first learned that a voice could mean something, that a hum could calm, that a silence could wound. And maybe, somewhere along the line, one of them died with too much left unsaid and didn't leave. That night, sleep doesn't come easily, not because you're anxious, but because your ears are wide awake. It's as if they've taken on a second life of their own, reaching into every wall crack, every whispering window seam, every slight creak of Emku's wooden beams. You don't feel haunted. You feel included. At some point in the middle of the night, when the moon hangs crookedly and even the city dogs stop barking, you hear something that doesn't quite belong. A whisper, not from within the room, but from the courtyard. Not a voice, exactly. More like the shape of a voice. Like someone is mouthing a word just out of reach. You rise without thinking, wrap yourself in a shawl and step barefoot onto the cool tiles of the courtyard floor. Emku is already there. She doesn't look at you, just gestures. Come listen. In the center of the courtyard, where you once placed oil and the obsidian shard, now lies something else. A perfectly intact clay seal with the spiral etched in deep relief. You didn't make this. Emku didn't either. You both crouch over it. She doesn't seem surprised. It's leaving something, she says. A record. You ask what it means. She exhales. It wants us to say it back, which leads to what may be the strangest ritual of all. A whispered conversation between you, Emku, and a thing that might not be real in any conventional sense, but is very much present. She whispers something into her hands, then gently cups them over the spiral. You follow. You don't know what you're saying. You just let the thought fall out. Like steam. After a moment, the spiral warms. Just slightly. Barely noticeable. You both lean back and wait. Nothing happens. And then, about 10 feet away, a chime rings. Not a bell. A pot, hung from an old beam you didn't realize had a wire. It sways once, and then stills. A sound made not by wind, but by answer. Later that morning, over bread and honey, Emku explains. There are legends that the Edimu isn't just one spirit, that it's a listening echo, passed between generations. Whoever hears it, holds it. For a while, you look at her sideways. Wait, are you saying you're... She shrugs. Not possessed, not cursed, just tuned. It's a lot, but it makes sense. She hears things others don't. She builds sound traps not for profit, but to balance spaces. She never speaks louder than she must. Her voice never echoes. She's a keeper of the in-between. Historians still debate whether such a role ever existed formally in Babylon. Some rare scrolls refer to murmur keepers or breath scribes, believed to have worked in tandem with temple officials to calm the air. Many dismiss this as poetic metaphor. But maybe, just maybe, there were people trained to hold silence the way others held power. You think back to Sirutu, to Nedu, to the game children played in the alleys, the basket-headed listener, the spiral symbol, the jars of whispered breath. It's all one lineage, passed in fragments, disguised as stories, jokes, games. Even the fringe scholars might be underselling it. The rest of the day unfolds quietly. You accompany Emku to a kiln where she leaves a new batch of whisper pots to fire. You visit a spice vendor who speaks only in proverbs. You sit beneath the ziggurat's shadow and simply breathe. And that night, you hear it again. Not the hum, not the whisper, but a voice, your voice. Repeating something you said 2 days ago, word for word. But softened, slowed, as if the walls had been holding on to it and just now decided to return it. The clay remembers. Morning greets you, not with sound, but with sensation. A warmth on your cheek, a gentle pressure in the air, like you're being reminded to stay present. Babylon is quieter than usual today. The birds are chirping, yes, and the street vendors are setting up, but everything feels muted. Not in a somber way, but like the whole city is wrapped in a woolen shawl of calm. Emku has already gone out by the time you rise. She's left a note, scratched into a piece of bark. Went to the lower quarter. Meet me at the Echo Market. You've never heard of such a place. After a simple meal, flatbread and figs, you make your way through the winding southern streets. The lower districts are older, denser, and smell strongly of clay, cumin, and thyme. You pass a small fountain, where 3 children are whispering into the water, giggling as the ripples carry their voices back. Then you find it. Not a marketplace in the traditional sense, the Echo Market is more of a gathering, half underground, tucked behind 2 sloped alleys. No loud vendors, no shouting about prices. Instead, you find stalls where people demonstrate their goods quietly. A woman shapes silent bells, chimes designed to not ring unless the wind is just right. A potter sells echo flutes that play only after a pause. There are clay bowls marked with old spirals, spools of thread dyed with ash and oil for binding stories into garments, and incense cones labeled "for respectful silence only." Mku waves you over near a small display of cracked tiles. "These," she says, "are recovered from a forgotten shrine." "The original House of Stillness." You raise an eyebrow. "The original?" She nods. "Before the ziggurats, before the temples. This was just a small shelter with walls made from whisper-thick clay. No idols, no prayers spoken above a murmur, only offerings, breath, memory, and quiet." Historians barely agree this place existed. Most dismiss it as apocryphal, a metaphor for inner reflection. But Mku's tiles are real. Faint etchings line their edges, tiny spirals, delicate ears, and small footprints that fade off mid-stride. One tile bears a curious mark, a reed pen bent in half. You remember Nedu's broken stylus. "These were places people went," Mku says. "Not to ask for things, but to release them. Thoughts, regrets, secrets too loud to carry." You try to imagine a society that not only permitted such rituals, but designed spaces for them. And then you realize Babylon was built for sound, but also for its restraint. The ziggurats reached up for the gods, yes, but underneath it all ran this second layer. A hidden current of reverence for quiet, an entire city tuned, like a lyre, to echo only when necessary. You browse further and find a vendor selling soft clay tablets, unfired, meant to be held while whispering, then dissolved in water afterward. The idea being, let it leave with the river. You buy one. You spend the rest of the day exploring the market, not as a tourist, but as a participant. You whisper into a reflection bowl. You trace your finger around an old spiral-shaped amulet. You share 3 words, unimportant ones, into a sealed pot and hand it back to the vendor, who promises to bury it where shadows go. Later that evening, you and Mku sit by the riverside, watching lamps float past on tiny rafts. Each lamp holds a written name and a single curl of incense. You ask her what it means. "Names people aren't allowed to say anymore," she explains. "Sometimes for reverence, sometimes for forgetting. Either way, they let the river carry the memory." You nod. You take out your voice ladder, raise it to your lips, and hum. Not a tune, just a long exhale wrapped in pitch. A matching hum rises from the reeds. Not a voice, not a spirit, just the city answering back. Because that's what Babylon is, a place that doesn't shout. It remembers. The river hums like a living thing. It doesn't rush or babble. It murmurs as if in conversation with the banks. You and Mku linger near the water long after the last lamp has drifted from view. Neither of you speaks, and in Babylon, that silence is speech. You wake the next morning to something new. Rain. Not a thunderous downpour, just a soft, hesitant drizzle. The kind that dapples the dust without washing it away. The kind that invites roofs to sigh and courtyards to sing in little puddled rhythms. It smells like wet clay and jasmine. Rain is rare this time of year. Mku calls it listening weather. She's already sweeping the courtyard when you join her. A few clay spirals from her shelves have been brought inside. Moisture can ruin them if left too long in the open. One, though, remains under a tamarisk leaf, catching drops. When you reach for it, she gently stops your hand. "Let it record," she says, and you realize she means literally. She believes the drops are saying something, and the pot is listening. The idea seems strange at first, until you remember what Sirutu said. That clay remembers. That vibrations shape its surface. That spirals form when something hears too much to stay still. Today you walk to the scriptorium, a scribe's hall that's been abandoned for years. Emku says the city plans to restore it, but that's been the story for decades. Inside, the walls are still lined with cubbies and worn benches. A few reed pens lie cracked and brittle in a corner beside a bucket of dried ink stones. There's a feeling here. Not cold, not haunted, just hushed. Like the room is holding its breath for returning voices. You find an old notation tablet. It's not written in standard cuneiform, but in rhythmic marks, repeating slashes and curves arranged in wave patterns. A note on the side reads, "For the training of breath." This was no ordinary writing exercise. This was vocal rhythm training, not for singers, for readers, priests likely. It's a practice that modern historians barely understand, but fringe theorists believe these notations were used to teach vocal pacing, to prevent echoes, to tune the voice to sacred spaces. Some even argue that these were early forms of noise etiquette, a proto-philosophy that recognized sacred spaces not through incense or hierarchy, but by the way sound was allowed or not allowed to move. You experiment. Standing in the center of the room, you read aloud one of the patterns, not as a chant, but as a breath-guided hum. Short pulse, pause, long exhale, rest. As you do, the air in the scriptorium changes, not dramatically, just enough. A subtle shift in pressure, like someone opened a door very far away. You feel taller, lighter, more present. The corners of the room no longer seem so distant. Emku watches from the threshold. "You felt it, didn't you?" You nod. "That's why we built with angles," she says. "Why doorways were never quite square. It wasn't aesthetic, it was acoustic theology." She smiles, like it's the simplest idea in the world. On the way back, she tells you of a myth, that the Edemu once lived inside the walls of the very first school. Not as punishment, not as a threat. As curriculum, it listened to every word, every murmur, every scratch of reed against clay, and those who forgot to listen themselves, their styluses would snap, not out of malice, but as a reminder. Historians still argue whether that school ever existed, she says, but every old teacher I've met believes it. Deep down, by now the rain has stopped, the city glistens, refreshed. Children run barefoot through puddles, their laughter echoing. Bells ring from distant temples, 3 tones, carefully spaced. Even the donkeys seem to clop more gently. You find yourself humming again. Just a quiet pattern. Nothing showy. The rhythm from the old notation tablet, still lodged in your bones. And you wonder, what if Babylon's greatness didn't come from its height, its wealth, or its kings? What if it came from its acoustics, from a city that taught its people how to speak with care? By now you've started noticing spirals everywhere, not just the carved ones, though those still pop up on walls, pots, old tiles, but the natural ones too, in the grain of the wood on Emku's doors, in the way river foam curls at the edge of an eddy, even in the ash pattern left behind when the wind swirls through a brazier. It's as though the Edemu's mark isn't just a warning or signature, it's a reminder. Today Emku says you're going underground. Literally, there's a network of storage cellars beneath parts of Babylon. Most have collapsed, been sealed off, or repurposed for wine. But one, halfway between the old granaries and the disused shrine, has remained untouched, or mostly untouched. It's called the Sub-Cellar of Breaths. According to Emku, this was once a place where sacred silence was stored. Priests came here to recover from ritual overload. Listeners, not speakers, were trained here. Its original name has been lost to time, but the current one has persisted, whispered from potter to merchant to scribal apprentice. You bring a small clay whistle, the obsidian shard, and a spiral-etched shard in your satchel, just in case. The entrance is modest, a sloped stone stair half hidden by a fig tree. Emku unbolts the door with a tool shaped like a flattened tuning fork. You ask if that's intentional. She just nods. The moment you descend, the air changes. It's cooler, of course, musty, a bit metallic. But more than that, it absorbs. Your sandals make no sound. Your breathing feels edited. Not shallow, not strained, just filtered. Like the room decides which parts of your breath to keep. And then you feel it. Not dread, stillness. This is not a haunted place. It's a preserved one. You walk in near silence through the narrow stone passage, lit by soft light from slotted windows above. In one room, you find broken styluses arranged in a spiral, perhaps discarded tools or a symbolic offering. In another, a circular table with 5 carved seats, none quite the same height. Emku says this was the listening ring. Each seat affected acoustics differently, training priests to hear voices at varying distortions. She gestures for you to sit. When you do, she walks to the center and says a single word. Namtaru. It sounds ordinary, but from your seat, it echoes strangely, elongated, like it passed through water. You try the other seats. In one, her voice sounds like a whisper shouted from a mountain. In another, it seems to arrive before her lips move. You feel a chill. This is where they learned to interpret the spirit's tone, she says. Not the words, the feelings behind them. Scholars scoff at the idea, of course. They claim Babylonian ritual spaces were practical, not performative. But clearly, someone took sound very seriously here. Every stone placed for a reason. Every chamber a different sonic world. You enter the final room. It's nearly empty, save for one thing. A tall, narrow clay jar, unsealed but undisturbed, its rim dustless, as if someone had touched it only hours ago. You recognize the shape. It's a zishagu, a spirit breath jar, but this one is enormous, taller than your waist. The reed shaft still embedded at the top. Emku steps forward and touches it lightly. It's full, she says. You're not sure what that means. She kneels and listens, then gestures for you to do the same. You press your ear to the jar, slowly, carefully, and then you hear it, a whisper. Not words, not language, just remembrance. The sound of a room inhaling for the first time in 1,000 years, the murmur of old clay, of stories not quite told. It's peaceful. You back away, blinking. Emku takes out a small stylus and scratches one mark into the wall behind the jar. A single spiral. You don't speak as you leave. The Edemu doesn't demand fear. It doesn't demand tribute. It asks for awareness. And here, beneath the city's surface, where sound can live undisturbed, you understand something profound. Babylon did not build temples to contain gods. It built spaces to understand them. You leave the Sub-Cellar of Breaths with a strange lightness. Not because you've solved anything, nothing about the Edemu has offered simple conclusions, but because you've heard something no one else has. Not a scream, not a demand, just a presence curled in sound like a cat in sun. Emku is silent as you walk. You sense she's allowing the weight of the moment to settle in you. Or maybe she knows words can't touch it. Back at her courtyard, the day is already slipping into that golden dusk Babylon does so well. The light flattens the walls, thickens the air. You drink water with mint and sit together for a while without speaking. Finally, Emku says, "There's one more thing." She rises and brings out a box made of dark wood, banded in bronze, with a spiral etched so delicately on the lid it only appears when the sun hits it at an angle. She opens it carefully. Inside, a clay tablet, no larger than your hand. But it hums. You hear it before you see it clearly. A low vibration, gentle and steady, like the sound your own ears make when you've been sitting in stillness for too long. She hands it to you. "Go ahead," she says. You lift the tablet. Immediately, you feel heat, not burning, just a pulsing warmth, like a living hand. The spiral on its face is filled not with marks, but grooves, tightly packed, continuous. It looks like a single unbroken line. "This," Emku says, "was made by the first listener. Not a priest, not a scribe, a potter's daughter. She couldn't speak, so she carved. Each night she'd mark a single breath into the clay. Not a word. A breath. You look closer. Each curve varies ever so slightly, some tighter, some longer, some dipping, as if catching a sigh. She did this for years. No one noticed. Not until the jars she fired began responding. Responding? They resonated, Emku explains. Gently, quietly. If someone in the room raised their voice, the jars would hum in return. Just enough to remind them. This is the origin, then. Not vengeance, not haunting, just reminding. Historians still argue whether the Adimu began as a person, a myth, or a misinterpretation of faulty acoustics. But the tablet in your hands makes all those categories seem irrelevant. It doesn't matter how it started. It matters what it became. A rhythm, a culture of listening. You place the tablet on the ground and hum one long note. The tablet hums back, subtle, low, but there. You ask Emku, is it still the same Adimu? After all this time? She smiles. Maybe it's not an it anymore. Maybe it's a we. And with that, your journey completes its circle. You came chasing a ghost. Instead, you found a memory that listens. A tradition that hums in clay and bone. A city not defined by kings or walls, but by how it holds its breath. That night, you lie in the courtyard under the stars. The air is still. No whispers. No echoes, just quiet. And presence, and the slow spiral rhythm of a city still remembering. Word count 1052. Wind down, 300 words. And now, just rest. You don't need to think about anything else. You've wandered through a city built not only with bricks, but with silence. A place where stories don't always shout, they hum, where echoes are sacred. And even the dust remembers your footsteps. Let your thoughts unravel slowly. Let them spiral, like the clay carvings on Emku's pots. Never rushing, always returning to the center. There's no urgency, no questions left to answer tonight. The Adimu is quiet, and so are you. You might still hear a breeze moving through tall grass, or the echo of sandals in a stone hallway, or the soft press of breath against clay. But these aren't hauntings. They're comfort, familiar, gentle, as old as firelight, as kind as shadows. Feel your body settle, the way the city settles at dusk. Let your shoulders sink. Let your jaw soften. Let your breathing match the rhythm of a distant, unseen drum. the kind that only plays when you're half asleep, half dreaming. You're safe. Babylon listens, and now so do you. Tomorrow, the city will wake again. The pots will sing, the spirals will hum. But for now, there's nothing you need to do. No one you need to be. No sound you need to make. Just stillness and sleep.